Hello guys, welcome back to another video, and today is going to be the fifth and final part of my Blood and Iron card review. So, for those who don't know, it is the newest expansion for Kards, and it's coming out in less than 24 hours as of the point of recording. It will be probably out by the time this video goes out, and if it's not out already, it will be out in a few hours after this video goes out. And I am going through in a series and talking about all of the different cards that we're going to get in this expansion, and talking about them from a bit of a design point of view and a competitive point of view, while giving some thoughts on, how, if they'll be good in a draft scenario or a new player scenario, depending on the rarity, but primarily focused on how these cards will impact the game competitively in terms of what power level of decks are they going to make. And if you've watched all of this series up until now, I would highly recommend watching the last video. In my opinion, it was highly entertaining, because I got a little bit annoyed at some of the ways that certain cards were being designed, and I stand by my annoyance there. I would absolutely do it again. But now we're down to the last handful of cards, so let's see if these cards are going to be in the well-designed category or the poorly designed category. Because honestly, we've seen some very interesting cards out there, some very creative, well-designed cards that might be fun to play with, and some very creative, well-designed things that are going to be very frustrating to play with. And then there's been some of the, no, not some of, literally the worst designed cards they have ever added to this game. So we're quite hit and miss here. What are the final 16 cards that I have here for you today going to be? Well, we'll just have to wait and hear my thoughts on them. So let's roll the intro and jump into the cards.
What a performance there by J King.
J King, full plot armor.
J King is pushing himself into the ranks of the legend.
J King is our world champion! J King 7! What? The back-to-back Cards world champion!
Alrighty, so we ended off the last video with Slashers, the sort of the core best card of the British don't attack your units archetype, and well, we are back with Britain, but now with a very different card. We have Kangaroo Transport, which is a 1-credit standard order that says give a British infantry blitz and +1 heavy armor. It counts as a tank. This is a very interesting card. So just 1 credit, give any British infantry blitz and heavy armor. There's use case scenarios if you're in a deck with a ton of card draw. You could use this even just like on like a Glamour Boys or a Grenadier Guards, just make your big guard infantry unit that you're playing slightly better and give it blitz, make it slightly more reactive. If you're playing a deck with a lot of card draw and some big infantry, you could just theoretically run one of these. Probably not great in that situation. It also allows, since the infantry gains blitz and counts as an attack, it essentially means any British infantry is capable of hitting the opponent in the HQ. And then you start thinking about that a little bit more and remember, well, okay, there's Indian Brigade, which is a 1-credit 1/3 Fury. And, okay, so you do Indian Brigade for 1 credit, Kangaroo Transport on Indian Brigade for 1 credit, and then you can push it to the front line for 1 credit. So you have 3 credits, and then Blitzkrieg, and now it's a 4-attack 0-op Fury, and that's 8 damage. For 6 credits, and then, what additional attack buffs can you start playing on this? There's, like, OTKs galore created by this card. Are any of them actually particularly good? I kind of doubt it, because all of them will just be stopped by your opponent having the front line or your opponent having guards. And they're also all based around unit attack, which is very difficult to scale. So your opponent can probably very easily heal out of it. And even if it doesn't necessarily cost a ton of credits, it's going to still require a bunch of different cards. So yeah, probably not going to be that good, but it is something to keep in mind. Maybe final pushes with Indian Brigade in a return of Brit-Soviet OTK, just without push this time. But yeah, primarily, you're probably just going to be using this card as like a 1-of or a 2-of in a deck with a lot of infantry. Giving things heavy armor is powerful. It will depend a lot on the meta, because if there's a lot of fight going around, if there's a lot of just order-based removal going around, heavy armor doesn't mean anything, and blitz only matters if you're going to be attacking with it the turn you play it. So you know, what British infantry are you going to be running that you will then have the credits to attack with it after spending a credit already to give it blitz. I don't know. I don't see this card as being highly impactful now, but it's a very scary card in the game because 1 credit give any British infantry blitz and counts as a tank for the end of time is a very, very terrifying proposition, so they'll have to keep this card in mind in the future. Then we have a Creeping Barrage, and now we are back to supporting the opponent can't attack deck. We have a Creeping Barrage, which is a 3-credit special order for Britain, and it says pin target unit. When the pin is removed, retreat it. And this is a very interesting card. So, on its own, 3 credits, pin a target unit, absolutely not worth 3 credits. It's worth, like, less than 1 credit, if you think about it, like, compared to, like, naval power. Retreating a unit is valued at, I mean, as we saw with the new Polish card, retreating a unit's valued at about 2. So combining these 2 effects together, it does add out to be around 3. And there was one other thing to factor in there, though, when you're talking about that. One is when you're combining 2 effects into a single card, you can't just simply talk about the card typical cost for that effect, because it's those 2 effects in a single card, so that's also sort of like counting like a card draw if you were to run a retreat card and a pin card separately and could play both of them for a combined 3 credits. That's 2 cards that you need to have in your hand, whereas Creeping Barrage is only 1 card, so you're also factoring in the card draw there, so then it becomes worth around like 4 credits, 4 to 5 credits. But obviously that's not a perfect way to evaluate a card, because is that something that you really want? The other thing to keep in mind, though, is it's not just retreat, it is retreat on the following turn, and that also means that you're delaying the card again. So you can't just immediately replay it, because that's sometimes the issue with retreat, is they play a big card that you can't deal with, and then you retreat it, and then they replay the big card that you still can't deal with, and you now have 1 less card in your hand and deck. So it's pinning it, and then they can't replay it on the following turn, so it's taking up the board spot. It might be taking up a spot in the front line, especially if Black Prince is on the board, and now you're pinning the units in the front line. So it's going to pin there, it's going to take up one of the 2 slots you're allowed to have in the front line, and then on the following turn it's going to again get retreated. Although maybe you want to be doing this on something in the support line, so it can't attack immediately, and then on the following turn it will be returned to their hand, and then they'll have to spend the credits to replay it. So all in all, the best case use for this card is very, very powerful. 3 is just a lot of credits to do something that doesn't draw, it doesn't heal, it doesn't create units on the board. But if you're going to be able to create enough garrison units that you don't want a lot of units in your deck because you want to have as many board slots available as possible for all of these garrison units that you're going to be creating, Creeping Barrage is a very solid order to throw into your deck that is going to do something. Because Britain doesn't have a lot of, like, actually functional orders that you can run. Like, Britain doesn't have just, like, direct damage removal orders for the most part. So Creeping Barrage very well could fit into that deck. Absolutely could see it not making the final cut for a competitive list, just because, you know, if it's in a faster meta, 3 credits pin a single unit is just not going to be where the game's at. But if we're in something slightly slower, if people are playing big single target threats, Creeping Barrage is very, very potentially powerful for that deck. And seemingly without being too oppressive, I'm sure Creeping Barrage combined with all the other stuff with Monty and Black Prince, it might get really annoying, but just on its own, it's a way to do pin and retreat in a somewhat interesting way. I might live to regret calling that somewhat interesting, but at least for the time being, it is a pretty interesting way of doing it. Then we have the 4th Guard Rifles, and it's a Soviet Elite. It is a Soviet Elite Infantry, 9 cost, 9/9, 2 operation cost. Is it gonna be good? Is it gonna be bad? Is it gonna be ludicrously stupidly broken? And we're leaning into the ludicrously stupidly broken. Exclusively on curve, though. And that really does fit into Soviet's themes. This is, compared to some of other Soviet elites that have existed in the past, this is lower on the power level, drawn later in the game. So if you're thinking about cards like First Rifles, or I think it's the 39th Infantry Regiment, the 5/5 that steals the 2 cost or lower unit, those cards, if played on curve, won you the game huge amounts of the time because they were literally the best cost cards for that cost in the entire game, and they're terribly designed. And later in the game, though, they're still really, really good. Like, you can play First Rifles on, like, turn 20, and it's still going to be incredibly powerful for 4 credits. And you can play the 39th on turn 20, and if there's a unit to target with it, it's still going to be pretty good. Although that one does start to drop off. This one is very interesting because the text on it, one, it has Blitz and it has Guard. The Guard makes it useful against aggro, and the Blitz makes it useful. It didn't really need Blitz, to be completely honest. The Blitz is just going to make it better when you're playing it on curve. It also means, like, if you have 11 credits, you can play this down and hit something big with it, or push it to the front line. But then the text on this card, that is just very frustrating to me, is if in your hand, reduce the cost by 1 each time the enemy draws a card. That's some very interesting text. So if your opponent never plays a card that draws them a card, it's just going to say essentially at the end of your turn, each turn, reduce this cost by 1. Because at the start of your opponent's turn, they're going to draw a card. And there's very, very few ways to stop that. So this is essentially just going to reduce in cost once per turn at the end of your turn when it is in your hand. And, you know, if it was just that, I still wouldn't like this card, but that would be one thing. But it's going to also reduce every time your opponent draws a card on top of the one card that they draw a turn. And that is going to be convoys, expansions, even if it is just a cycle with a Jaeger regiment or a For Freedom. And every single time, this card is going to get reduced in cost by 1. So let's say it's in your opening hand. So let's say you go first, it's in your opening hand. Turn 1, you end your turn, it goes down to 8 credits. And then your opponent's probably not drawing a card on turn 1. So then you do your turn 2, it's going to go down to 7 credits. And then your opponent very well might draw a card. Turn 2, there's a few ways that they could do that, where they could For Freedom something. Maybe they took the front line and play a 22nd on turn 2, and now it's down to 6 credits. And then you have your turn 3, you're not going to do something, it goes down to 5 credits at the end of your turn 3 when they draw their normal card, and then they might draw 1 or 2 more cards. Let's just say 2 for the sake of argument. So what was it down? I think it was 5 credits, so now it goes down to 3 credits, and it's your turn 4, and you can play it. You can play a 9-9 on turn 4, because it was in your opening hand. And if it wasn't in your opening hand, you would draw it that turn, and it would be a 9-cost 9-9. A dead card in your hand. At least for that turn. So yeah, basically, if you get this in your opening hand, it's going to be able to be played pretty easily. It's still probably going to take, like, a minimum, like, 4 turns for this to be able to be played, and that's still probably going to be spending some credits on it. However, if say if you draw it in your hand on turn 2 and then you have the same 4-turn window, now you'll have, 5 credits to play it or 6 credits to play it instead of 4. So that's going to also make up, because your credits are going up as its cost is going down. But at the same time, it's just, why do you design a card this way? Like, there's some interesting things with this card, which is, in certain matchups, you might have to take a risk of, do I want to keep this card in my opening hand? Because it's functionally like a 5-drop. Maybe it's a 4-drop, based on if they're going to be drawing cards. Do you want to keep a big 4-drop in your opening hand? Well, in some matchups, yes. In some matchups, no. If your opponent has a lot of retreat, if your opponent is capable of dealing with a 9-health unit quite easily with orders, or maybe like a number 9 commando effect, or like a sissy, something like that, well, then this guy's probably not going to be that good. But if your opponent is playing something that does not have access to that, and there are certain decks that do not easily have access to removal for something this big, well, then playing it down on turn 4 is probably just going to immediately win you the game. And I'm not a big fan of cards that are going to immediately win you the game if you draw them on turn 1. Big shocker. So, yeah, all in all, I don't really love the design of this card, just because, why is it just like a big stat effect? I'm not a huge fan of cost reduction on cards if you draw them in your hand. I'm not a huge fan of Wellington, but at least with Wellington or the 34th Guards, the 6/6 that you run in self-damage, those cards are cards that you have to do something to reduce their cost. Like, they're actually interactive. You have to draw other cards to reduce their cost while they are in your hand. Same thing with Women at Work. You're spending the Women at Work card to reduce the cost of something in your hand. This is just going to have its cost reduced for being in your hand for absolutely no reason, and then on top of that, it's going to punish your opponent for playing the game. There is some ways you can use, like, France Force Draw. Like, you can, like, compromise on 3 and then play this guy out on turn 4 and push him to the front line. So you can do Force Draw to, like, further accelerate your ability to get this guy out, but it's literally just, like, credit cheating that is based on, is it in your opening hand? Because, like, you know, maybe you don't draw it in your opening hand and you draw him on, like, turn 7, and then he's just a 9/9 in your hand on turn 7, and then on turn 8, you can play him as an 8-cost 9/9, and then you don't have the credits to use the Blitz, and you're just playing a big dude in your deck. It's basically just like a worse 272nd. But yeah, again, it's just a card that's fair some of the time. It's fair a decent chunk of the time, and sometimes it's absolutely, utterly unfair and is going to decide a game based on the mulligan. And yeah, not a huge fan of this card design. I don't think it's broken. It's just designed in a very frustrating and somewhat lazy way, and it's disappointing that this type of card is going to be in the game, because absolutely Soviet Control would run this, because would Soviet Control run a 9-cost 9/9 Blitz Guard infantry? No. No, they wouldn't. Would they run an 8-cost 9/9 Blitz Guard infantry? Probably not. Would they run a 7-cost? There's some control decks that would run that. Would they run it at 6-cost? Yes. Would they run it at anything less than 6-cost? Yes. Is this card going to consistently cost less than 6 when you get around to playing it? Absolutely yes. So yeah, this card is going to be played in Soviet Control, and it very well might see play in decks outside of Soviet Control, because even if you're just like a full-on aggro deck, if you draw this in your opening hand, and then you're just doing aggro things and dumping your entire hand other than this card, and then you're able to play this card out on like turn 5, you know, that's like the big top end. Like your opponent's dealing with your swarms of little dudes, and then you throw out a 9/9 on turn 5. That could be the top end of an aggro deck, and obviously, yes, sometimes you're just going to top deck him later in the game, and he's going to suck because you didn't get him in your opening hand on turn 1, but you're an aggro deck. You're willing to take... You're willing to run those types of risks more often in an aggro deck, and yeah, this card is just... not a big fan of this card, let's just say that. Moving on, we have Bocage Warfare. I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce that, but it is a 1-credit US order, special rarity, and it says give a unit in your support line gets +2/+2 when it moves into the front line. So essentially it is a 1-credit give a unit +2/+2, but it's only when it moves into the front line, and if that unit moving into the front line is an infantry, then it's not able to immediately attack. If it's a tank, it can. So if you play this on a 35T and then push it up, you basically just played 1-credit, give your 35T +2/+2, and now can hit face for 2 damage for free. If you play this on an infantry and then push it up, it's more similar to like a 99th effect, where, you know, you're basically just like getting the +2/+2 on the infantry. And it's a good effect. How good is 1-credit for 2/2? It's pretty good. If it was just give a unit +2/+2 for 1-credit, that would be very, very good. However, it's not that. It's a bit more conditional. If you can't get the front line, this card's unplayable. And even if you can get the front line, this card still might just die to certain effects. So for example, you play this on an infantry and then push the infantry to the front line to give it +2/+2, and then your opponent plays Pack 40. And it was going to die either way, and now you're down a card. Because it's difficult to trade, it really needs to be in a deck with a lot of tanks, or if we're just in a certain place in the meta where maybe you're using this to just clog down the front line, and, you know, you just have like a lot of cycle, and you're just trying to clog down the front line and keep room, make room for like other stuff that you're trying to do, slow the game down a little bit. It's difficult to imagine it being played in that situation, and Frontline already sometimes doesn't want to run 99th, and 99th is a unit, and it's easier to get immediate value on it. So yeah, it's not a bad card. Maybe you play this more in like a sort of US-Japan, Japan-US aggro deck. Type 94 Bocage Warfare seems like a powerful combination. But yeah, it's a very aggressive card, but probably not going to immediately shake up the meta. Then we have Exhaust All Options, a 4-credit elite Japanese order. So Japan is known for their very, very powerful cheap elites. Generally, if you take a look at all of the Japanese elites of all time, generally the more expensive it is, the worse it is. And if it's cheap, it's probably going to be some of the most broken stuff in the game. So exhaust all options is 4 credits, pin target unit and adjacent units. That is the same as the new text on Monty. And then instead of drawing a card, the effect that is going to make this cost 3 more than Monty, instead of drawing a card, is pin units deployed and added by the enemy next turn. And that's pretty huge. So basically, it's buying you a turn. It's like Snowstorm in that way, where it's just going to prevent blitz units. It's even preventing blitz units better than Snowstorm, because your opponent could still even push up through the Snowstorm and just spend the additional, like the additional 6 to 8 credits operating the unit. This is just fully stops you from taking unit damage on the opponent's next turn. If you're pinning up to 3 units. There's situations where you could still take it. So if they have a unit in this, they have like a tank in the support line, and then like 2 units in the front line, you pin the 2 units in the front line. Anything they play will get pinned as well, but that unit in the support line is still not pinned. However, this can be combined with other pin synergy cards, most notably Forced Surrender, which is, of course, pin a unit. All enemy units that are pinned will be pinned for an additional turn. And that is very interesting with exhaust all options, because then it becomes a sort of question of, do you play the Forced Surrender before, or do you play the Forced Surrender after? Either way, your opponent is not going to be able to be interacting with their board much, and that is very, very frustrating. I don't know why they printed pin. Like, this is very bizarre to me, because when the game first came out, there wasn't that much ways to pin, and then over time they just introduced more and more ways to pin until pin became a bit of an issue, and a lot of combo uninteractive decks revolved entirely around pin, and that was something that they did not want in their game. And then they nerfed all of the pin cards into the absolute dirt, and nerfed all of the decks that revolved around pinning cards into the dirt, and now, like, 4 years later, they're just bringing back pin and buffing the hell out of it to push uninteractive gameplay. I don't know. This expansion said that it was they said in the beginning of this, in their blog post thing, that the intention of this expansion is to push more unit-on-unit combat. They're tired of like these sort of order-based decks, and that's something that they've been voicing for several years. But I don't see how pin is pushing this. You're releasing very powerful orders that are pinning the opponent and winning the game without letting them use their units on board. And if you can't use units because all of the units you play are going to get pinned, well, that's going to push you more to relying on orders to remove the garrisons and the Cheshires and all of the other units your opponent has that are killing you via not operating as units traditionally, because they're not actually attacking. They're just sort of sitting there on the board. If this was a British order, I would be complaining a lot more than I am. This is a Japanese order, and it does seem like the garrison deck, you do want to be doing that with Britain main. It seems a lot harder to incorporate that as an ally, and that means that it's going to be very difficult to use exhaust all the options with that package. And if you look at just what Japan got for this expansion, Japan got absolutely nothing to support this type of card. So you're probably not going to be running this with a huge pin synergy. Maybe people figure out that it's just good enough to run this with Forced Surrender, just in like a control package or some sort of combo package, like maybe Japan-France Forced Draw. Maybe that's enough. Maybe it's enough to just run slashers and some other garrison cards and do a Japan-Britain sort of don't attack my units type deck, although I highly doubt it. In tournaments, maybe if you're trying to counter a specific lineup, you do bring that as just a inferior version of the Britain deck, just so they can't ban both. But all in all, I feel like we might see a little less exhaust all options than you might think at first, although it is a very scary card, and also it's guaranteed to be in the game for the next 2 years, so if at any point Japan control or Japan gets some sort of engine, some sort of combo, then be definitely aware of exhaust all options and its synergy with Forced Surrender. Then we have a well-designed card. It's been a while since we've looked at one of these. We have Iron Victory. It is a 5-credit limited order for Soviets, and it says discard your hand. For each card discarded, add a T-34 1942 with 1 operation cost to your hand, and that's a very, very cool card. So first of all, immediately, just 5 credits, discard your entire hand. That could have synergy with the Japan self-discard effect. So if your hand's all like Betty's and Ginjas and Sally's and whatnot, then it's giving you all the T-34s on top of doing all the other stuff. Maybe a slightly more realistic thing is you just happen to run a few supply chains in your deck, and Iron for Victory can just simply discard supply chains and act as a little bit of card draw. Although you're probably not going to be using it for that effect, but it is something to keep an eye on. But primarily you're going to be using this as just create gas out of your anti-aggro cards, and that is something that T-34 did kind of need in certain matchups, because T-34 was always about finding the balance between threats and anti-aggro tools, because you obviously need to make it to turn 5 to start playing your T-34s and your big T-34 synergy cards. But making it to turn 5 meant that you had to run a lot of cards that cost 1, 2, and 3 to help with your consistency. And if you're running a lot of cards that cost 1, 2, or 3, well, you can play some T-34s out on turn 5, but if your opponent's a control deck and answers the first few of them, then suddenly you're running low on threats and you're just drawing a bunch of these 1-drops, and things are looking bad. If you just run one of Iron Victory in your deck, and suddenly you turn all of your your Bryansk regiments or your Bloody Sickles or whatever it is, you turn all of them into T-34 1942s, which is the 5/5 Blitz T-34 with 1 operation cost, which is quite big because they're very difficult to use otherwise. And if this stacks with the other operation cost reduction cards that T-34 has access to, so if you have one of those on the board, then it means that they will all operate for free, and that means you can play 2 of them at once. You can Iron Victory and play 1 of them immediately if you're on 10 or more credits. That's pretty cool. This is not a card you're going to be running 3 of, because you don't want to be playing this card a lot of the time, because a lot of the time your hand is going to be other T-34s or cards that draw or tools that affect the board that you want to keep in your hand, because you're not just going all out on sort of you're not going all out as a last chance Hail Mary type of play, and that's sort of what this card is. So I think that you probably run 1 of these in a T-34 deck just as a Hail Mary for certain matchups, and I think that's really neat. And yeah, this is just a really cool card. It's a very well-designed card. Speaking of not well-designed cards, though, we have the 110th Panzer Grenadier. I swear we already had a card named like this. There's too many Panzer Grenadiers, too many infantries, too many yada yada yada. But it is a 5-cost 5/5 infantry elite for Germany. Germany does have a track record of having very good 5-cost elites. So it's a 5-cost 5/5 infantry, 1 operation cost, and it says Blitz. So 5-cost 5/5 Blitz infantry, pretty good. And it has the passive effect, your ground units with 4 or more attack deal 3 extra damage. So that is very interesting. So it says +3 damage. It does not say they have 3 extra attack. And that's a very, very significant difference in its wording that I think a lot of people have missed on this. So what does deals 3 extra damage mean? Well, it means anytime that the card would deal damage, it does 3 extra, and that is going to count attacking. So it will function as if it has +3 attack. And that's going to be in combat with other units, as well as attacking the enemy HQ. But on top of that, if it's dealing any damage through other means, that will also deal +3 damage. And just thinking off the top of my head, Autocanone is a 3/3 artillery that does 1 damage when you play a unit. If you can get that attack up by 1 to 4 attack, and then you play Panzer Grenadier, now your Autocanone is going to be dealing 4 damage every time you play a unit, on top of attacking for 7 if you just buffed its attack by 1 to 4. And suddenly that's very, very scary. But that's on top of just the fact that on its own it is a 5-credit 8/5 blitz infantry that will also have the immediate effect of any other 4 or more attack ground units you have on the board also getting +3 attack. It's basically blitzkrieg on a stick, and in this case the stick is absolutely huge and absolutely undercosted on top of its other potential abilities with other ways of dealing 3 damage. This is just kind of an absolutely insane card. Also, it, like, I'm trying to think of other ways that you can deal damage. Like, technically works with commandos if you can get the attack of your commandos up. That feels like we're getting a bit into the silly territory. But yeah, this is just like a ludicrously powerful card. Like, the degree to which this card is power crept is insane. If it didn't have Blitz, it would still probably be playable. The fact that they just also threw Blitz onto this card is stupid. Again, not a fan of this card design. I'm a fan of pushing new archetypes. The 4 or more attack archetype, not the most interesting, in my personal opinion, but I get it. You know, you are limited in what you can do. You don't want to just, like, flood the game with new keywords and whatnot. So I get it, but you want to push a new archetype, and sometimes that means pushing some elites, and I'm perfectly fine with that, releasing powerful cards built around a certain archetype. This is not a powerful card built around a certain archetype. This is a this isn't just a crazy powerful card that also works on a certain archetype, because you don't have to run that many units with 4 or more attack for this to be an insane card. You really don't. You don't need this in, like, a dedicated deck. This is just, like, a 5-cost 8/5. Like, this is just, like, the top end for a lot of decks. Like, you know how Jagro plays Dragon Slayer because it's just a big thing? Well, maybe German aggro decks or German tempo decks are just going to run this guy, because for 6 credits, you can put an 8/5 to the front line that's also probably threatening other stuff. It doesn't talk about their base stats, so if you, like, push this guy to the front line, and then you play a Blitzkrieg to buff all of your ground units that all have, like, you know, just, like, 1 or 2 attack, and now they go up to 5 attack from the Blitzkrieg, and now they will deal 3 additional damage, so it's like this just double casts Blitzkrieg. Yeah, this card is stupidly powerful. And the other frustrating thing is, we talked a lot about the payoffs for the 4 or more attack. What are the payoffs? There's the US card that draws a card, not really a payoff. There is the special that gives you 2 extra credits. That's a good card. It's not a huge payoff, but it's sort of a bit of an engine piece. There's Case Blue, which isn't that good. And then there is, I don't even remember the name of it, but the card I complained about, yeah, in the last video, the worst designed card 1939 has ever made, by a somewhat significant margin. And then there's this. So if you talk about, like, the 3 main payoff cards for this deck, you have an absolutely atrocious elite that can't be run in any deck, let alone this deck. You have an absolutely insanely broken elite that is going to be run in every deck. And then you have a card that does random RNG BS woohoo, like, Clown Fiesta card that sometimes is going to win you the game and sometimes be absolutely atrocious and all around be a huge contributing factor in lowering the skill cap of this game and just ruining it. So yeah, all around, I might end up hating the 4 or more attack deck more than I hate Garrison, not because of the way the deck plays, but just because of the cards that got printed to support it. Yeah, this is a very poorly designed card. Now we get to Sea-Doo Division, which is a poorly designed card for a very different reason. So Sea-Doo Division is a 6-cost 4/4 infantry with 0 operation cost, blitz, and shock. So just immediately, how good is that stats with blitz and shock on a 0 operation cost 4/4 infantry? Not amazing. It's sort of like a much worse winter regiment in certain ways, where, you know, for 6 credits you can just deal 4 damage to something in the front line, and then you keep a body afterwards. It's sort of similar to Schützen and Winter Regiment, just slightly worse, but it's not terrible. And obviously it has other text on the card. It says becomes a veteran if you have 4 or less credit slots, and then the veteran version is an 8/8 infantry with blitz and shock, still 0 operation cost, with the passive text, draw 2 additional cards if your hand is empty at the start of your turn. So obviously if you can veteran this, it's a very powerful card. And what is the trigger to veteran it, it's playing it in a credit deck, or a self-credit destruction deck, because you have to have 4 or less credit slots, and this costs 6. And if you're Reichsbanking this out to get it out on turn 4, well, you could just play Reichsbank and then on turn 4 play Cedar Division, and because you have 4 or less, it immediately veterans, and then it stays the 8/8 even as you gain additional credits. And as I'm saying that, I'm realizing that that is an incredibly stupid high roll. Hopefully that there's not enough Japan-German tools adjacent to that to make that a playable deck, but fairly consistently getting an 8/8 shock with 0 op on turn 4 does seem like something that is going to be worth doing. That's terrible, but that didn't even factor into my original talking about why this is poor game design. The reason that it's poor game design is the intention, I believe, is playing this in self-credit denial, and you use this on a 1 roof turn. So you can either play this on turn 6, and then on turn 7 you lose like 5 credit slots, and then it veterans, or you are going off on a turn, so, you know, at turn 5 or turn 6, you're losing a bunch of credit slots. You play 1 roof, the 1 roof gives you like 12 credits, and then with those 12 credits, you slam down 2 Cedar Divisions, and then you push up 2 8/8s to the front line, and then they allegedly draw you cards. So that's sort of the idea. The reason that doesn't sound good in a self-credit denial deck is, one, self-credit denial didn't have a ton of issues with the payoffs necessarily. More of they didn't have an issue with the end game payoff. Once you're like going off, the Great Expanse is more than enough to end a game a lot of the time. And this is just substantially worse than the Great Expanse in that it does mean that you have a little extra threat on top of the Great Expanse, if you have to just use the Great Expanse for ramp without getting like a huge turbo attack buff to end out the game. The downside is, though, this card doesn't do a lot for self-credit denial. Like, if you're not 1 roofing, it's impossible to get to 6 credits, so this card can only be played on a 1 roof turn. Well, you're going to be wanting to do other stuff on a 1 roof turn a lot of the time, and I don't feel like the payoff is that good. And then the other downside is, obviously, part of this is you're just going to be using this for its abilities, and what's fun about both versions of this having Blitz, I believe this is the first time we've seen a veteran that has Blitz on both versions. It means that you can play this, and then you can attack something, and trigger the shock, or you can play this and push it to the front line, if the front line's clear, and then you can play a credit destruction card, which will then veteran it, and then the veteran version appears, and then it can blitz again because it's a new unit, even though it's an infantry. So you can use that to attack twice, or you can use that to push it to the front line and then attack face. However, again, that does require you having more than 4 credits when you play the card, and then you use the card, and then you reduce the credit slots. And, like, is this enough to be sort of like the engine for self-credit denial? I have my doubts. The reason that I'd say that it's sort of poorly designed is I have no idea what the additional text on this card is. The veteran version, the draw 2 additional cards if your hand is empty at the start of your turn. When is this ever going to happen in a self-credit denial deck? Like, you don't run out of cards. Like, when you run out of cards, it's not that your hand is literally empty. It's that your hand is a bunch of cards that you can't play or that don't affect the game in a meaningful way. It's very, very rare that you are ever entirely out of cards in your hand. And if you are, you're probably not having an 8/8 Cedar Division on the board, and if you do, you're probably winning the game. Like, you probably have won the game already, and if you're not, you're probably going to win the game because you've stuck a Cedar Division. And it also says at the start of your turn, not the end of your turn, so it also means that your opponent has an opportunity to remove Cedar Division, even if you get it on the board with an empty hand. Yeah, like, the text on the veteran version is, like, the most inconsequential text I've ever read on, like, any card in this game. It baffles me. Like, they could have just had the veteran version be an 8/8 veteran blitz shock and then removed the text, and it would be functionally the same. They also could have added interesting text. Like, they could have added at, like, the end of your turn, or, like, at the start of your turn, draw the most expensive card in your deck. And that is going to pull in the 1 roofs off the top of your deck. That's going to pull in the Great Expanses off the top of your deck. That's going to help you get into the win condition, and it's going to help support the self-credit denial theme. What is the text on this card? So the only time I could see the text on this card working is if you're just playing an all-in YOLO high roll Japan German aggro deck, where your deck is like 31 drops, 4 Reichsbanks, and 3 Sea-Doo divisions, and you basically, your entire idea is to just get a Sea-Doo division out on turn 4, and then it just is a huge 8/8 that draws you cards as you throw all of your 1-drops on the board. Yeah, it doesn't sound like a great deck. We'll have to see what the consistency is on being able to play a Sea-Doo division on turn 4 with Reichsbank, but honestly, that might be a more likely play case scenario than in self-credit denial. But we'll have to see. I'm glad they tried to do something for self-credit denial. It's probably not going to be that good, but if you can get out 8/8s, maybe that's just enough on the board. An 8/8 blitz shock, if there's just a lot of huge units going around, maybe self-credit denial can come back in the meta, where you're just playing a lot of cheap stuff, so you can get a lot of early damage by going under these slow mid-range decks, and then on your big pop-off turns, you can sort of answer the huge statted cards by slamming down these huge Sea-Doo divisions to just do some unit stomping against the opponent for a bit. That's possible, but probably not. Then let's move on to the French card. I believe this is the first French card we've seen. It is the 8th Marocain, or the Withiam. It is a 3-credit 5/5 infantry with 3 operation cost special rarity. So special rarity for the minor nations is the equivalent of their elites, and a 3-credit 5/5 infantry that is something we have seen before. There's the US has a 3-credit 5/5 smokescreen infantry with 2 operation cost. This has 3 operation cost, but it has the text, when you deploy another unit, your HQ gains defense equal to its operation cost. So basically, this is a bit of a healing engine. Think in the realm of Honey, but unlike Honey, this unit has this unit is very well statted for its cost. So it's not a card that you're playing to use yourself. It's a card that you're playing that your opponent needs to remove. It's almost like a 3-credit 5/5 guard in certain ways. And a 3-credit 5/5 guard is good. It's also going to be able to heal you. So in some ways, it's going to be a 3-credit 5/5 guard that also heals you. And then in some ways, it's not going to be like a guard at all, because your opponent's just going to go face and whatnot. But the power level of this card is incredibly powerful, and it also makes France look like a very good ally nation choice for the US Throp deck, because if you're already playing a lot of cards with 3-op, and you're also already playing cards that can reduce the operation cost of units, while playing a 3-cost 3-op unit that is already just really good, because let's be frank, this card is really good. If you're playing a France deck and you're playing cards with units, this is just a really good card. Like, think Soviet France, and then you play this, and then you play Engineers Regiment and immediately heal 4, and then you play Armored Train and immediately heal 5, and, you know, you're cooking. But yeah, all around, this card is a very, very powerful card, and will likely mean that we're leaning towards France ally for the Throp deck, and that's interesting, because Throp is not dedicated to a ally nation yet. Obviously, the first airborne in Britain, very, very powerful, but if France gets a few more cards to support Throp, France very well could be it. Then we have the elite for the Sherman deck, and, you know, yesterday and in the last video, I said that there's not a lot of Sherman synergy. The more I think about it, there is some Sherman synergy. It's just not good. Or at the very least, it's not worth making your deck running a lot of Shermans, and they're just substantially worse than T-34s in together. But Hell on Wheels is the 4-cost elite order for US that is going to hopefully be enough to give you a reason to play a Sherman deck. And the card says, Hell on Wheels, it does duplicate a friendly tank and reduce its operation cost by 2, double its attack if a Sherman. So basically, if you have a 4/4 Sherman, that's just the M4 Sherman, the most common one, this is going to be 4 credits, reduce its operation cost by 2, and summon a 4/4 0-op tank. And so another way of thinking about that is just a 4-credit 4/4 tank with 0-op, and deployment reduced the operation cost of a friendly tank by 2. However, it's a Sherman, so they both get double attack, so it goes from 4 attack to 8 attack, and it's unclear to me the way it's written if that will apply to both versions, but I'm going to assume that it will to make this card better, because at the moment it's not amazing. So, you know, give a Sherman +4 attack and -2 operation cost and summon an 8/4 seems pretty good. Is that good enough to run in decks that aren't dedicated on Shermans? Maybe. The big upside I see with this card is the, I completely forget the name of it, but the 2/4 artillery from the last video that counts as a Sherman. The more I think about that card, the more crazy that card seems to me. So I think that card is going to be absolutely seeing a lot of play, and it counts as a Sherman, so Hell on Wheels means that it's going to be 4 credits, summon a 4/4 artillery with 0 op, and give your other artillery on the board 0 op. Oh wait, no, you can't do that, sorry, because it says target a friendly tank if it's a Sherman double its attack. So it can't actually target the artillery. In that case, Hell on Wheels seems very difficult to run outside of a dedicated Sherman deck, and I don't think a dedicated Sherman deck is that good. The other thing to think about with this card is duplicate a friendly tank, reduce its operation cost by 2. Maybe you're not playing this... Hear me out here. Maybe you're not playing this on a Sherman. Maybe this is a combo card. Because what if you can just get a different tank, say a Persian, you get out a Persian, maybe you cheat it out with some of the, like the special assignment type cards, the Gambit type cards, and you cheat it out, and then you play Hell on Wheels, and you summon a second Persian, and they both get their operation cost reduced to 1, and then you hit your opponent with 2 Persians. Yeah, it's a thing you could do in like a meme heavy ramp deck. But yeah, all around, I don't think this card is that good. It's not terrible. You're probably going to see people like play this in Frontline from time to time. It's not going to be the optimal way to build Frontline, but it's probably going to be common enough to keep an eye out for it, because it could be scary. Like if you play an M4 Sherman on 4 and then you play a Hell on Wheels on turn 5, that could be very scary. And it's not bad in that situation. The reason that I wouldn't say it's run in an optimized Frontline deck is sometimes you're not going to have Sherman on board. And sometimes you're going to play it and then it's going to be immediately removed. And running a card that requires you to have another card on the board doesn't sound that good. Although maybe there is a world where you could run it in Frontline, just because even if you don't have a Sherman, you can use it to like duplicate like a Hellcat, and that could be useful either offensively or defensively. But again, you're getting to the world, like you're getting to a point where you need enough credits to do all of this, and Frontline is usually won or lost the game by like turn 8. So you're kind of getting out of the range of being able to do Hellcat and Hell on Wheels on the Hellcat. I guess you can do that on 7 credits, now that I'm saying that, but it's maybe enough to be run in Frontline. I'm skeptical. But yeah, all around, interesting card. Well designed. Then we have the Panzer 3J late, as opposed to the Type 94 TK early. I'm sure tank enthusiasts will sound off in the comments and let me know why these things are called late and early. I just find it amusing. So the Panzer 3J late is a 4-credit 4/4 tank with 2 operation cost. It's a pretty standard for the 4-cost German tanks with 2 op, so pretty standard body, and it has blitz, and it says becomes veteran when the enemy HQ has taken 4 or more damage. So obviously the idea is you play this in the 4 or more attack deck, because this has 4 or more attack, and then if you hit face with one of your units which has 4 or more attack, it becomes veteran. And the veteran version is 0 op, blitz, and shock. And this is very interesting because it can count itself. I feel like this is something that a lot of people have missed. So you can play this, you push up, you attack the opponent in the HQ, and it does 4 damage, and then because it has dealt 4 damage, it then veterans, and the veteran version also has blitz, and then can attack again. So for 8 credits, this can deal 8 damage to the opponent, and that seems like a pretty good card. It can also deal 4 damage to the opponent, and then it shock attacks something, and that could be quite good. Just deal 4 damage to the opponent HQ, deal 4 damage like to an opponent's unit, get like a value trade in, and then keep the 4/4 tank on board. Seems pretty good. It will also trigger any like 4 or more attack kind of stuff. All around, very, very good card. And with this, if the deck can lean more towards burn, maybe Case Yellow could be run, just to try to get across the line late in the game, because you're just dumping all the cards in your hand and your opponent has to remove them rather than just going face in case you have Case Blue. I might have said Case Yellow earlier. So yeah, this card makes me think maybe Case Blue has a better chance of seeing play. But also I just see this card as like a pretty decent card on like the top end of Jaggro. If there's not a lot of guards going around, if there's not a lot of frontline, like if you're guaranteed to have the front line, this seems like maybe just a good way to either get burn in against a guard deck or just get some good value trades in against a guard deck. You don't have to hit face with this. You can hit something for 4. Hit like a 3/4 unit for 4, so this drops to a 4/1, and then you go face for 4 damage with your like 0-op cavalry regiments, and then this veterans, and then you deal 4 damage to an enemy unit with shock with the second version, and you basically got to deal 8 damage to enemy units. You got to take out 2 big things, only going face for 4 with the infantry if your opponent's high on health, or if they're low on health, maybe you can just burn them out. All around, very, very powerful card, very, very interesting card. Unfortunately, this is a card that you can get off of Contest Doctrine, and Contest Doctrine, notoriously, if you've ever played the card or played against the card, has much better options on the Blitz Doctrine than they develop on the Contest Doctrine, and this is adding an amazing card for the Contest Doctrine. They also have the 7-cost Fight veteran tank being added to the Contest Doctrine pool. So Contest Doctrine is getting a huge buff this expansion, because you're no longer going to be forced to pick some of those really terrible tanks. Unfortunately, Maus is getting added to the pool, but you're definitely getting more options that you're very, very happy with. And if this is in a if this is being played inside a Blitz Doctrine deck, obviously it's going to come down as a 5/5. But yeah, this is a very good card. It's pushed a lot. If all of the if all of the ludicrously overpowered cards in this expansion were designed like this, where like this is a very powerful card. This is very clearly a power crept card, and maybe this card will need tuning down in the future. But at least this is a card that they're very clearly pushing, rather than a card that is just abjectly broken. But anyways, moving on. We have more French cards to look at. This is the 152nd Regiment, or the 152e Régiment, which is a 1-credit 3/3 guard. That's right, 1-credit 3/3 guard standard. We have a 1-credit 2/2 guard standard in Japan, but this is an ally nation, so they're getting a 1-credit 3/3 guard. 3 operation cost, so it is again, more fuel. Another 1-drop for the Throp engine. Throp is looking incredibly scary. I would say Throp, right now for me, the best deck on release in the expansion. Immediately, just based on like the synergies, I think the best decks are going to be Throp and Garrison. Now, obviously, like there could just be like some German mid-range deck that runs good cards without like a dedicated archetype. But of the archetypes they are pushing, Throp and Garrison seem like the ways to go. But you can't just play this as a 1-credit 3/3 on turn 1, because that would be broken. Instead, it says cannot be deployed unless you have 6 or more credit slots. And the word slots here is important. You can't just Reichsbank into playing 4 of these on turn 4. Although, even if you could, I don't think you would. That doesn't sound that good. But yeah, it requires you to have 6 or more credit slots, so you can't play them early in the game. They're not a card you're keeping in your mulligan. However, if you have, they're huge engine enablers once you get past turn 6, and we've seen Throp has the ability to get past turn 6, and if each time you play one of these, it draws a card, and also it heals you 3 health, 1-credit 3/3 guard, heal 3, draw 3 that you can only play past turn 6 is absolutely a card that you're going to play past turn 6. Yeah, this is a very, very powerful card in the Throp deck. This, on its own, probably not that powerful of a card outside of Throp. The one thing I'm thinking of is if you're like doing Phony War with a lot of force draw, like compromise stuff, this is just a very easy card to get out of your hand, and it's just another good solid defensive tool. So maybe there's a world where you can run like a handful of these in a control deck that's like pretty content with its draw capabilities as just using this as a cheap thing to throw out of your hand, but probably not. It's probably a Throp card, and in the Throp deck, this card's very, very good. Then we have the Free French Navy, a 2-credit order for France, limited rarity. Draw the top card of your deck with an operation cost of 3, so top unit of your deck with an operation cost of 3. Your HQ gains +3 defense. So this is just a straight up a Throp card. Obviously, you can run this outside of Throp. With if you're just running like France control with the 3-cost 5/5, the Moroccans, that is just a solid card that you could run in certain decks. There's also worlds where maybe you're running things with 3 operation cost outside of the Throp deck. I can't think of any off the top of my head. 3 operation cost is a pretty niche operation cost, like maybe Leopold. This can just like fish for a Leopold. However, it fishes for it, and it heals you 3, 2 credits, draw a card, gain 3 defense. Not bad. Not amazing. Like, obviously, people play Radar Alert for 3 credit, draw a card, heal 4. But also, that card can sometimes do other things, and the card it draws can be anything. I feel like if you're a Throp deck, you don't want to draw Throp units in your card draw, if that makes sense. Because you're going to have Throp units in your hand, you're going to have Throp units in your board, there's enough of them in your deck that you're going to have, like, you're probably going to be running, like, 20 to 30 units with 3 or more operation cost. You're not going to want to run an order which is just 2 credits, draw one of these, like, 30 cards in your deck. You're going to want to be trying to draw the cards in your deck that aren't Throp units, that support your Throp units. You're going to be trying to draw your Pontoon Bridges, or your For Freedoms. You're going to be wanting to draw, you're really going to be wanting to draw your Victory March. That's probably going to be like the most powerful card in the meta moving forward. You're not going to be wanting to draw just another unit, and this is a card in your deck that is not affecting the board state at all. I think you'd just rather be running another Throp unit or a card that makes you not lose. I don't think that this card is going to be played in the Throp deck, and if it's not being played in Brit or US France Throp, I don't really see where you're going to be playing this card, outside of, like, fishing for very specific things in maybe, like, a combo deck. So, yeah, interesting card. Unfortunately, I don't think it's going to be that good. And we have the 77th Regiment, which is just a bit of a bizarre card to me. So it is a 3-cost 2/4 infantry, 1 operation cost for Japan special rarity, with blitz and shock. So it can deal 2 damage to something and not take any damage in return. Then it says, after this shock attacks, add a 20th Infantry Regiment to your support line, and the 20th Infantry Regiment is the 2/2 guard standard 1-drop, 1 operation cost unit. It's an actual just unit in the game. It's not like a token. But yeah, it will just add a 2/2 infantry guard to your support line. There's ways of giving this additional shock, like there's cards that we've looked at that said give a unit shock, so you could theoretically trigger this more than once. But yeah, basically 3-cost 2/4 shock that also summons a 2/2. That's, again, sort of in the same vein as the Soviet card. We saw the Soviet card that was quite similar, that summoned the T-70. This is good stats, but is it good enough to see play? I kind of don't think so. I think people are going to be doing far more broken things on turn 4 than playing a 77th Regiment and attacking. This is just simply not enough stats. Like, this card would have been good 2 years ago, 3 years ago. This card in Cards in 2024, where power creeping is going through the roof, this doesn't strike me as that useful. But again, there's a world, like, there's a specific situation where maybe, like, there's just a lot of aggro decks going around, and this seems like a decent card you could fit into Jagro to be better into other Jagro decks. It also summons 2 units for, like, a Shenano type thing. And if you're playing, like, a lot of AoE buffs, this is, like, a good way to fit in another unit, like a unit that summons a unit while affecting the board state without losing a unit. Maybe, but again, probably not. Then we have the Polish Special, a 6-credit 3/6 infantry with 3 operation cost, exile and guard, and the exile is for Exile France, which is very interesting. and also fits the 3 op cost theme. Basically, it's just a way to give France another card. This expansion, when they were limited to 3 cards, they just figured out a way to give France a 4th card, basically. And it says, enemy units that damage anything but this unit are destroyed. And that's incredibly powerful, because again, it's not enemy units that attack, it's enemy units that damage anything but this unit are destroyed, and it's not any unit other than this unit, anything. So this is actually the counter to Garrison. If you have this unit on the board, all of your opponent's garrisons will just kill themselves. They'll deal 1 damage, and then they will be destroyed automatically by 1st Grenadier's passive effect. And that's really powerful. So this is an incredibly powerful card. Obviously, it's also just really, really good in all sorts of decks. If you're playing something like Japan, Poland Legions, where you're going to have a lot of really small units going around, you might have frontline control. If you just play this, it means all of your opponent's units are going to be trading 1 for 1. It essentially gives the sissy text to all of your units in the frontline, because your opponent is going to have to trade through those to reach this if they can't suppress it or retreat it or remove it with another order. And that's the key word, or that's the key thing, is this card would be really good if orders didn't exist in the game. Unfortunately, orders do exist in the game, so it's not going to be sticking around too long if your opponent is playing a well-built deck. However, you can use this immediately because its enemy units will damage things on your turn if you attack into them. So again, this is sort of just like all of your units have sissy on your turn, because you can just kill any of your opponent's units as long as they are damaging your units. So this actually is bad with shock, because if you're attacking with shock things, they're not going to damage you. But otherwise, this card's really good. It's also a really good card at taking out some annoying smokescreen things. So if your opponent has a signal regiment, and you play this card and then kill one of your units, the Signal Regiment will deal 1 damage. That damage was not directed into 1st Grenadiers, and then the Signal Regiment will be destroyed. Same thing with Commandos. If their Commandos ping face while this is on the board, those Commandos will be immediately destroyed. Yeah, this card is kind of absolutely insane. And of course, it has 3 operation cost, and it's France Exile, so you could run this in the US-France Throp deck. And would you run it in that deck? Maybe? Depends on what the matchup's going to end up being against Garrison. I'm not actually convinced that you need this in the Throp deck, because the Throp deck is going to have stats coming out the wazoo, and when you have stats coming out the wazoo, you don't need the sissy effect on your units. You're just going to be, like, raffle stomping all of your opponent's units while they try to swarm you down with little tiny things. The fact that this unit has guard is actually a huge nerf to this card in a good way. Like, it's a downside for this card because your opponent is able to attack into it. You can't guard this unit. But they do have to be in the front line. And if they're just trying to push stuff off to the front line, you can just trade off all of your other guys. You can, like, blitz things out to trade out guys in the front line if this guy is sticking on the board unsuppressed. So this is honestly one of the most powerful cards of the expansion, in a way that is punishing to some of the cards that some of the less interactive cards from this expansion and just in the game in general. I really like this card. This might be one of my favorite cards of the entire set. It's very powerful, but at 6 cost, you are paying a lot for the effect, and it is not a particularly sticky unit. Doesn't have heavy armor, only 6 health. No, it can be targeted by orders. And it has 3 operation costs, so if you're running this outside of the Throp deck, it's not like an easy unit to use, especially if it gets suppressed, it's going to be sticking around. But in the right situation, it can be absolutely game-winning, and I love that about this card. So yeah, this is just a very powerful card that might be the antidote to what otherwise would be a Garrison meta, but maybe Garrison is just going to figure out a way to easily run suppress. Maybe they're going to be using the Cromwell with all of their pin cards, Cromwell plus Monty. We joked about that when Cromwell got returned and buffed, but now Monty is back, so, maybe this card does get suppressed. So you lose 1 board of Garrison units and then you suppress this. But yeah, all around, very, very interesting card, very well-designed card. And then last but not least, but fitting in that realm of damage, cards that affect unit damage rather than just attack, we have the Rangers, a British elite, the 3rd British elite here. It is a 3-cost 2/5 infantry with Fury. A lot of British cards are getting Fury this expansion. The Fury part of this doesn't matter a ton. what matters about this is the passive effect of increase the non-combat, non-attack damage dealt by your units by 1. So any damage dealt by the unit outside of combat and outside of attack damage is increased by 1. And the reason they have to include both of those is a little bizarre to me. I understand why they can't just say non-combat, because attacking the HQ does not count as combat. I don't understand why they can't just say non-attack damage dealt by your unit. Maybe that's just confusing of a wording. But either way, they have both of these, and that is going to affect all of your garrison units. That is going to affect the Cheshires. That is going to affect your commandos. That is going to affect your autocanones. This is going to affect your Shibatas. This is just a very, very powerful card with these other cards. So you do have to build your deck around it to a certain extent, and some of these triggers are easier to trigger than others. So, for example, Shibata, it's based on your opponent triggering it. So if you have Shibata and the Rangers on the board, your opponent's probably not going to play an effect, or an order, sorry. And then, with the garrisons, they trigger at the start of your turn. If you play the Rangers, your opponent can just remove the Rangers, or they can remove the garrison, and then this card will not have done anything. However, there are some cards, like Commandos, that will trigger on your turn, so you can run this in a Commando deck, and then play Commandos, play the Ranger, and then start playing a bunch of orders, and that will trigger all of your Commandos, and each of them will ping for 2 damage, and that is quite huge. So this is a very powerful card. It's not the most broken card ever. This is a well-designed card. This is a fun card. This is a fair card that is useful and playable in a variety of different archetypes. This is what cards this is how cards should be designed. And this is the last card that we have for this video, so this is the last card for this expansion, because this is part 5, so I've now reviewed every card from this expansion, and I'm very excited for a few things. I'm probably going to be streaming, if not the day of the expansion release, but certainly sometime this week, just to try out a bunch of different decks, see what's going on with the expansion. And you can definitely expect some more videos regarding the expansion and what decks to play, maybe showcases on specific cards in the weeks and months to come. However, I just want to take a brief second here to debrief about Blood and Iron as a whole, because oh boy, what is going on with the design with this expansion. It's very, very hit or miss with not just the power level of cards, certainly in the last 2 expansions, like starting with Winter War, the power level of the expansions have been increasing quite drastically. Like, the power creep in this game is setting in strong, and that does not seem to be stopping at all. It is only accelerating. Like, Winter War, compared to Brothers in Arms, is night and day. And then Covert Operations coming in with Bomber Mafia and Blitz Doctrine. Are you kidding me? Blew Winter War out of the water, and obviously we haven't played with the cards yet, so it's a little bit too soon to say, but if you just compare the best cards of Winter War to the best cards of Covert Operations to what are certainly going to be the best cards of Blood and Iron, it does just seem like a very linear power creep, but also the fact that you can all the cards are still in the game. You can run the best cards of Winter War with the best cards of Covert Operations, with the best cards of Blood and Iron, and that's going to be way better than running all of the cards from Legions and Breakthrough and Allegiance and the Classic set and Theaters of War. Just the power creep in this game is getting... Obviously, a card game needs power creep, but it's getting out of hand, but also... specifically, the design of cards is just getting really, really poor. So, for example, taking an example not outside of Blood and Iron, but, that German card, the German payoff, the 4-credit order for the 4-attack deck, that is the worst designed card ever, and maybe I have to do an entire video on that, because I have a lot more to say about how terribly designed that card is. But also just, simpler stuff like Bomber Mafia being able to develop into the B-24J and D, which are non-collectible tokens, whereas other developed cards are not able to generate collectible tokens. Why is that the exception to the rule? It's very unclear. Also, just develop as a mechanic in general felt like it was not necessarily something that was needed in cards, especially if it was not going to be something that was pushed in the future, because again, we haven't gotten a single develop card in this expansion. So why are you, rotating out Mobilize and Pincer to bring in Develop to release 4 incredibly broken cards and then move on from it? Yeah, just a lot of questions surrounding this. I remain pretty unimpressed. However, there's a lot of cards in here that are very cool. There's a lot of cards in here that I'm very excited to play with. There's a lot of well thought out, well designed cards. Some of them are good, some of them are bad, some of them are very, very strong. But it's okay for there to be good cards and bad cards and very strong cards in an expansion. That's what you would expect there to be. But maybe just cool it with the RNG Clown Fiesta cards that are supposed to be a core part of an archetype you're trying to push, and cool it with the cards that are just like ludicrously powerfully broken in every single deck if it's supposed to be a cornerstone of a archetype specific deck. But yeah, all around, that is all I have to say about this expansion so far. Subscribe if you don't want to miss my post-expansion content, as well as any other content I have. Let me know what you think about the expansion as a whole, as well as the cards that I covered in this video. Let me know if I missed anything. Let me know if you agree with me, disagree with me, if I changed your mind on anything. Join my Discord to continue the conversation over there. Subscribe if you haven't already. I think I mentioned that already. I'm just going through the list. Thank you to everybody who has donated. If you can and are willing to donate, feel free to donate in the Ko-Fi link in the description, and I will catch all of y'all in the next one. Thanks for watching.